She read the message on the screen one more time, just the word fine followed by a period. Her stomach tightened, and she could already hear the cold disappointment in the syllable. Earlier that day, they had argued about a broken promise, and the silence since had felt heavy. Now every letter of that small reply seemed to confirm that the friendship was sliding away. But what a different friend would have seen was simply an agreement to a plan, nothing more. The puzzle begins in that moment because the pixels on the glass did not change between the two readings. The light hitting her eyes was identical, and the letters formed the same sequence as before her fear took over. Somewhere between the screen and her conscious understanding, the raw information received a different story. The first comfortable explanation is that she merely interpreted the message differently based on her mood. Interpretation suggests a separate step after seeing, a layer of judgment that can be peeled away from the fact. That would keep the world firmly in place with seeing as a camera that records the truth before the mind gets to work. Except the camera metaphor breaks at the earliest stage in ways that change what responsibility means for all of us. The psychological term for what reshapes raw sensation before we become aware of it is a perceptual set. A perceptual set is a readiness to notice some parts of the world while completely missing others because of what you expect. Think of walking through a busy station, trying to spot a friend in a red coat, and suddenly red leaps from every corner. Your eyes did not suddenly become better sensors. Your brain adjusted the filters before you even chose to look. Now return to the message on the screen, but rewind to the moment the eye first lands on the letters. If expectation only colored later interpretation, then the visual system would have delivered a neutral set of shapes. Yet, the shapes are not neutral, because perception begins predicting what is out there before the signal finishes arriving. A classic piece of psychology saw this in action with an image that could be a young woman or an old crone. Around the same time, researchers showed that brief words like bank are understood faster when surrounded by river words than money words. This happens in milliseconds, far too quickly to be a slow, deliberate act of interpretation after the fact of seeing. What we call seeing is already a blend of light arriving from the outside and predictions coming from the inside. Your visual system is not a passive window, but an active guessmaker that saves time by filling gaps with what it expects. So the friend expecting anger did not first read a neutral word and then decide it felt cold. By the time she became aware of the word, the expectation of conflict had already shaped which emotional tone she perceived. This sounds like an error, yet the very same mechanism allows you to read sloppy handwriting without solving each letter like a puzzle. Without expectation, the world would arrive as a chaotic wash of color and sound that needs to be built from scratch every second. The cost is that strong expectations can overwrite incoming evidence before it reaches consciousness. And nowhere is that cost more visible than in a situation where a single word changes the memory of a real event. In a well-known study, people watched a film of two cars colliding and were later asked about the speed. When the question used the word smashed rather than hit, they gave higher speed estimates and remembered broken glass that never existed. The expectation planted by a single verb reached backward and altered what the mind had recorded from the film. What seems like a memory of shattered glass was partly constructed by the question long after the eyes had looked away. This reveals a deeper mechanism. Expectation does not just gate what enters, it reaches into the stored trace and reshapes the record. Memory is not a drawer we open, but a story we retell, and every retelling adjusts the details to fit the emotional frame. The friend who saw fine as hostile is now consolidating a version of the conversation that will harden with each recall. Tomorrow, when she remembers the argument, she will likely remember the tone as harsher and the words as sharper than they were. Even the raw perception of a single object is a negotiation between signals traveling up from the senses and predictions traveling down from memory. When you pick up a coffee cup, your grip opens to a width predicted by a lifetime of cups before your fingers touch the surface. The prediction is fast and usually correct until one day you grab a cup that is much lighter than expected and it jumps from your hand. The small mistake reveals the system at work, and psychological expectation functions on precisely this principle. A social world where we had to build every impression from scratch would be impossibly slow and exhausting. Expectations work like a rough draft that gets edited by incoming evidence, unless the evidence arrives too softly to overcome the draft. That soft evidence is the critical detail because the friend's message carried no tone of voice, no shifting expression, and no clarifying glance. Digital words strip away the rich signals that might have corrected her expectation in a face-to-face conversation. Behind a screen, the predictive engine runs on whatever fuel we give it, and that fuel is often worry, recent conflict, or past betrayal. One unsettling finding is that stronger emotions narrow the perceptual field even further, making disconfirming cues even less likely to register. When the body is flooded with the tension of an argument, the visual system literally searches more narrowly for threat-relevant signals. A single period at the end of a sentence can feel like a deliberate act of hostility because the filter has tightened around rejection. This is not a character flaw. It is a biological preparedness that once helped ancestors spot danger in dense undergrowth. Yet a conversation with a friend is not a forest at dusk, and the same ancient machinery can misread safety as threat. What makes the pattern even trickier is that expectation can also create the very reaction it fears, in a loop that psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you brace for coldness, your next reply will carry a guarded edge that your friend will likely read as hostility from you. Soon, both sides are reacting not to the other person, but to the negative expectations each has silently constructed. The loop closes so tightly that neither can point to who started it, because the real first mover was an invisible expectation. This is the complication that changes the story. The mind does not see a friend and then add anger. It sees an angry friend from the very first glance. That distinction matters because we treat our perceptions as the final report from reality and rarely question the predictions baked into them. When someone tells you to look differently at a situation, they are asking you to perform a near impossible trick without knowing the mechanism. You cannot simply peel away the expectation because it is knitted into the fabric of what you believe you witnessed directly. But you can introduce a deliberate pause between the automatic perception and the action that follows. The pause does not remove the first impression, but it allows a second read with a different prediction running alongside it. Return one last time to the friend and the single word on the screen, because we now know enough to see the moment with new clarity. Her stomach tightened because her visual system completed the sentence before she had finished absorbing the letters, filling the silence with remembered voices. The hurt was genuine and the feeling was real, but the target of that feeling was partly an image built by fear. That does not make her naive or weak. It makes her a human being operating with a predictive brain that was doing its job too well. If we required proof that the mind constructs reality, the same message arriving after a loving reconciliation would taste entirely different. The same pixels, the same retinal image, the same word, and yet a different emotional world because the descending prediction has changed. What feels like a sudden insight into a friend's true feelings is often a sudden insight into the shape of our own expectations. And here is the reversal that lands with weight. What you see is never simply what is there. It is always what your history has prepared you to detect. The strongest expectation does not announce its presence. It masquerades as the most obvious fact in the room. You do not notice the lens until it scratches, and you rarely notice the prediction until it collides painfully with a world that refuses to match. The climax of this journey does not offer a new certainty. It offers something far more useful: the recognition that certainty itself is partly a construction. Even the clearest visual memory of a conversation carries the fingerprints of who you were when you stored it, and who you became when you retrieved it. Expectations are not a flaw in the system. They are the system, and seeing them for what they are is the beginning of flexibility. The friend who felt fine as a dagger did not suffer from a broken brain. She suffered from a brain that valued speed over accuracy at a moment of vulnerability. Speed keeps us safe from cars and falling objects, but it makes relationships harder because accuracy there requires slowing the prediction. Slowing down means deliberately offering the mind a competing prediction, perhaps by asking what a neutral observer would see in the message. It means noticing the tightness in the chest and labeling it as an old expectation rather than a fresh verdict about the person in front of you. When you do that, the message on the screen starts to loosen its grip, and alternative meanings become available again. What once looked like a period full of finality might slowly reshape into a tired friend who simply did not know what else to type. The relief that arrives is not that the world has changed suddenly, but that your relationship to your own predictions has become more flexible. Expectations will still arise because they are woven into every glance, every sound, and every memory that surfaces. But now you understand that the story of seeing begins before the eyes open, and that gives you room to edit. We return to the cold open with a different awareness. The screen glows with a single word, and two possible worlds hang in the air. One world is shaped by fear, in which the word is a door closing from the other side. The other world is shaped by patience, in which the word is simply a bridge to the next sentence when the friend is ready to speak. Neither world is objectively more real because the physical stimulus is too thin to decide the question by itself. What gives one world power over the other is the prediction you bring to the light, and that prediction can be examined. Examining a prediction does not require you to suppress emotion or pretend the hurt does not weigh on you. It only requires you to notice that the first draft is not the final story, and that additional data deserves a turn at the editing table. This is not positive thinking. It is perceptual honesty about the limits of a single glance, a single message, or a single memory. Our brains are not truth machines. They are survival machines that build a usable model of the world from fragments and forecasts. Recognizing this does not make you trust yourself less. It makes you aware of the construction so you can rebuild when the blueprint no longer fits. The architecture of expectation means that two people can look at exactly the same moment and see entirely different realities, both feeling certain. Staying open to the possibility that your certainty contains a draft means you stay in the conversation long enough for the other reality to become visible.